The massive war chamber aboard the flagship asterisk Eternal Dominion asterisk buzzed with nervous energy as hundreds of Kithirian warriors filled the tiered seating. Commander Velthar stood at the center podium, his imposing 8-foot frame casting long shadows under the crimson battle lights. His ceremonial armor, forged from the finest Kithirian steel and adorned with victory ribbons from a dozen conquered worlds, gleamed like liquid metal. The holographic projector hummed to life, displaying a three-dimensional image of a small blue and green planet spinning slowly in the void. White clouds swirled across its surface, and a single grey moon orbited nearby. To the assembled warriors, it looked peaceful, almost beautiful, soldiers of the Empire. Velthara's deep voice boomed through the chamber's acoustics, reaching every corner where young warriors sat eager for glory. Today marks a historic moment. You are the first generation to be assigned to what High Command calls the Human Front. A murmur rippled through the ranks. Many had heard whispers about this new species, but few knew details. The commander raised his clawed hand for silence. These creatures, he continued, gesturing toward the spinning planet, call their world Earth. Our xenobiologists have studied them for 3 standard cycles now. What we have discovered should fill you with confidence. Warrior Lieutenant Grexter leaned forward in his seat, his purple skin darkening with anticipation. At 25 cycles old, he was considered young for a Kithirian warrior, but his scores in combat training had been exceptional. This deployment would be his chance to prove himself worthy of advancement. Beside him, his battle brother Zevkin shifted excitedly. They had grown up together in the military academies, sparring and competing since childhood. Both had dreamed of facing the legendary Draknori shock troops or the mysterious ethereal mind warriors. Instead, they were being sent to fight an unknown species on a backwater planet. Intelligence reports paint a clear picture. Velthara activated another hologram showing anatomical scans of human physiology. These beings are remarkably fragile. No natural armor plating like our own. No enhanced muscle density. Their bones break easily. Their skin tears at the slightest pressure. Warriors began to chuckle among themselves. Some had expected a challenging assignment, but this sounded more like pest control than warfare. Furthermore, the commander continued, they possess no telepathic abilities whatsoever. They cannot sense our thoughts, predict our movements, or coordinate mentally like civilized species. They rely entirely on primitive vocal communication and crude electronic devices. Grixtel found himself grinning. The ethereals had been able to read Kithirian battle plans directly from their minds, making them nearly impossible to defeat in conventional warfare. These humans sounded helpless by comparison. The hologram shifted to show human weapons and technology. Crude projectile firearms, basic explosive devices, and energy shields that looked centuries behind Kithirian standards filled the display. Their weapons are laughably primitive. Velthara explained, well, we wield plasma rifles capable of melting through battle armor. They still use kinetic projectiles, essentially throwing small pieces of metal at high speed. Their most advanced energy weapons are roughly equivalent to what our ancestors used 500 cycles ago. The laughter in the chamber grew louder. Young warriors began making jokes about bringing ceremonial weapons instead of combat gear. But perhaps most telling, the commander raised his voice above the noise, is their complete inexperience with galactic warfare. They have never faced an alien species in battle, never developed tactics for fighting non-human opponents, never learned to adapt to different gravities, atmospheres, or combat environments. He gestured to a tactical display showing human military formations. Their armies are designed to fight other humans on their home planet. Same physiology, same limitations, same predictable thinking patterns. When faced with superior Kithirian warriors, their rigid military doctrine will crumble. Zevkin leaned over to whisper to Grixtel, "Remember when we sparred against those Draknori prisoners? Now those were real warriors. These humans sound like they'd break if we looked at them hard." Grixtel nodded, already imagining the commendations he would receive. Perhaps he could even request a transfer to a more challenging front after this easy victory. Commander Velthar manipulated the hologram to show comparative statistics. "Our analysis indicates that a single Kithirian warrior possesses roughly 10 times the combat effectiveness of a human soldier. Our superior strength, natural armor, enhanced reflexes, and advanced technology create an overwhelming advantage." The display showed simulation after simulation of Kithirian forces overwhelming human defenders. Every scenario ended in swift, decisive victory for the Empire. "Some of you may be disappointed." Velthar acknowledged the restless energy in the room. "You trained to face worthy opponents, to test yourselves against galactic legends. Instead, you are being sent to subdue primitives who barely understand the galaxy exists." He paused dramatically, letting his words sink in. "But remember, every great warrior must begin somewhere. Consider this assignment your graduation exercise. Prove your worth against these humans, and you will earn the right to face more challenging foes. Fail here, and you will never be trusted." With real warfare, the chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. This was not just an easy assignment. It was a test of basic competency. "You represent the might and glory of the Galactic Confederation," Velthar concluded, his voice rising to a crescendo. "These humans will learn what it means to face superior beings. They will kneel before Kithirian strength, or they will be swept aside like dust in the cosmic wind. Show them no mercy, for they would show none to you if positions were reversed." The warriors rose as one, saluting with fierce determination. "For the Empire," they chanted in unison, their voices echoing through the vast chamber. As the assembly dispersed, Grixtel walked beside Zevkin toward the transport bays. Round them, other warriors discussed tactics and made bets about how quickly the human resistance would collapse. "I give it 2 weeks," said veteran Coldith, adjusting his plasma rifle. "Maybe less if they're as weak as the briefing suggested." "You're being generous," laughed another warrior. "Once they see real combat, they'll surrender within days." Grixtel felt a surge of confidence mixed with slight disappointment. He had hoped for a real challenge, something that would test his skills and training. Instead, he was being sent to fight creatures who sounded more like frightened animals than soldiers. How wrong he would be. As the transport ships prepared for departure, none of the Kithirian warriors could imagine what awaited them. They had studied human anatomy and technology, but they had never studied the human spirit. They knew about human weaknesses, but nothing about human determination. Most critically, they had never learned the most important lesson about warfare. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the 1W. Ho has nothing left to lose. The massive transport ship Glory of Kither shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its engines cooling with metallic groans that echoed through the hull. Grixtel felt his stomach lurch from the transition, a sensation that never got easier despite years of space travel. Through the reinforced viewport of the troop bay, Earth's moon grew larger, its grey surface marked with craters and shadows. "First time seeing the human moon," commented veteran warrior Kexidol, floating beside him in the zero-gravity section. "Looks dead. Perfect for a target practice." Grixtel pressed his face against the cold transparistelle, studying the lunar surface with growing excitement. Several human installations dotted the landscape like tiny metal insects. Solar panels glinted in the harsh sunlight, and he could make out the geometric shapes of landing pads and processing facilities. "Look at Those pathetic structures, Zevkin sneered, joining them at the viewport. His purple skin had taken on a darker hue, indicating his battle readiness. No defensive barriers, no shield generators, no automated turrets. These humans built their bases like they never expected a real fight. Squad leader Vexma's voice crackled over the ship's communication system. All warriors, prepare for assault deployment. We are approaching landing zone Alpha. Target designation is Facility 7, the primary mining complex with approximately 30 human workers. The transport bay filled with the sounds of warriors checking their equipment. Plasma rifles hummed as power cells were verified. Combat armor systems ran diagnostics. And assault pods were prepared for launch. The atmosphere was relaxed, almost casual. Many warriors joked and laughed as they secured their gear. This will be over before midday meal. Zevkin continued, admiring his reflection in his polished helmet visor. I bet half of them surrender the moment they see us. The other half probably faint from terror. Grixtel found himself grinning at his battle brother's confidence. The briefings had been clear. Humans were weak, frightened creatures who had never faced real combat. This would be more like a training exercise than actual warfare. The assault pods were sleek, angular craft designed to punch through enemy defenses and deliver warriors directly into combat zones. Each pod carried 5 fully armed Kithirian soldiers, and enough firepower to level a small building. As Grixtel strapped himself into his pod's combat harness, he felt the familiar rush of pre-battle adrenaline. Pod 7, you are cleared for launch, came the voice from flight control. Estimated time to target, for minutes. The pod bay doors opened with a hiss, revealing the star-filled void of space. One by one, the assault pods shot from the transport ship like bullets from a massive gun. Grixtel watched through his pod's camera feeds as they screamed toward the lunar surface. Leaving trails of superheated exhaust behind them, the moon rushed up to meet them with terrifying speed. Grixtel could see Facility 7 growing larger in his display. A collection of domed buildings, mining towers, and processing plants connected by enclosed walkways. It looked even more defenseless up close. 30 seconds to impact, announced their pod pilot. Brace for a landing. The assault pods crashed into the lunar regolith with thunderous impacts that shook dust and debris high into the airless sky. Emergency thrusters fired to slow their descent. But the landing was still violent enough to rattle Grixtel's teeth. His combat armor absorbed most of the shock, but he still felt like he had been hit by a transport truck. Move, move, move. Squad leader Vexmabot as the pod doors blew open. 50 elite Kithirian warriors poured out of their pods, weapons ready, expecting to find panicked humans fleeing in all directions instead. They found empty corridors and an eerie silence that seemed to press against their eardrums like a physical weight. Grixtel's squad advanced toward the main entrance of the facility. Their boots echoed strangely in the artificial atmosphere, and their helmet displays showed normal oxygen levels. Everything appeared peaceful, almost abandoned. Where is everyone? Whispered warrior Dexenol, his plasma rifle sweeping backhand. Forth as he scanned for targets, the intelligence reports said 30 workers were stationed here. Maybe they evacuated when they detected our approach, suggested Zevkin. Though his voice carried less confidence than before. Cowards probably ran the moment they saw our ships. Squad leader Vexma held up his armored vest, signaling for the squad to halt. They had reached the facility's main airlock, which stood open and inviting. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim blue glow, and the silence was broken only by the hum of life support systems spread out. Vexma ordered, his voice tight with growing unease. Check every corridor, every room. Find the humans, They cannot have gone far in this environment. The warriors split into smaller groups, moving deeper into the facility. Brixtel found himself partnered with Zevkin and two other soldiers, advancing down a corridor lined with mining equipment and storage containers. Their helmet lights cut through the dimness, revealing nothing but empty spaces and abandoned workstations. That's when the lights went out. The facility plunged into absolute darkness for a terrifying moment before emergency illumination. Kicked in, casting everything in hellish shred, the sudden change made Grixtel's heart race, and he could hear other warriors cursing in surprise over the communication network. Then came the sound. A low, rhythmic pounding that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Asterisk thump, thump, thump. Asterisk, it was steady, deliberate, almost like a giant heartbeat echoing through the facility's metal framework. "What is that noise?" Zevkin whispered. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. His plasma rifle trembled slightly in his grip as he spun around, trying to locate the source of the sound. "Probably just machinery," Grixtel replied, but his own voice betrayed his nervousness. "Mining equipment, ventilation systems, something like that." The answer came in the form of explosions that rocked the entire facility. But these weren't the clean energy bursts of civilized warfare that the Kithirians were used to. These were dirty, improvised charges that filled the air with thick smoke and razor-sharp shrapnel. The blasts seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath their feet. Through the chaos and smoke, Grixtel caught his first glimpse of their enemies. They moved like shadows, darting between cover points, with fluid grace, never staying in one place long enough for a clear shot, never revealing more than a silhouette before vanishing again. "Contact front," shouted Warrior Nexitha over the communication channel. "I see movement in Corridor B7. But when the Kithirians rushed to investigate, they found nothing but empty space and the lingering smell of human sweat and fear. It was as if the humans could disappear into thin air. The pattern continued for hours. When the Kithirians advanced down a corridor, the humans would attack from behind using passages that shouldn't have existed. When they secured a room and set up defensive positions, explosives would detonate in the walls, turning their safe haven into a death trap. The humans had turned every piece of mining equipment into a weapon. Welding torches became flamethrowers that could melt through Kithirian armor. Industrial lasers became sniper weapons that could punch holes through reinforced helmets. Even the facility's cleaning robots had been reprogrammed to carry explosives and ram into unsuspecting warriors. "This is impossible." Zevkin panted into his helmet microphone as he crouched behind an overturned mining cart. "How can they move through solid walls? How do they know exactly where we're going to be?" Grixtel had been wondering the same thing. The humans seemed to anticipate every move, counter every tactic, and appear wherever the Kithirians were most vulnerable. It was like fighting ghosts who could read minds and walk through matter. On the second day, they discovered the truth. The facility's maintenance tunnels were far more extensive than the official blueprints showed. The humans had spent years expanding them, creating a hidden network of passages that honeycombed through the entire complex. They could move anywhere without being seen, strike without warning, and vanish before retaliation was possible. But the tunnels were built for humans, beings barely 6 feet tall and much smaller than the massive Kithirian warriors, the aliens. Couldn't follow, couldn't pursue, couldn't even see where their enemies went. They were fighting a war where only one side could choose the battlefield. The psychological warfare was even worse than the physical attacks. The humans left messages scrawled on walls in their primitive script. They played eerie sounds through the facility's communication system. They even managed to hack into the Kithiri and helmet displays, filling them with disturbing images and false information for 3 days and nights. 50 elite Kitherian warriors, the pride of the imperial military, were pinned down and slowly picked apart by what intelligence later revealed to be use. 7 humans. 5 were mining engineers who had never fired a shot in anger before the invasion. 2 were security guards whose previous combat experience consisted of breaking up bar fights. When reinforcements finally arrived on the 4th day, they found 12 shell-shocked survivors huddled in the facility's main processing plant. Grixtel was among them, his purple skin pale with exhaustion and trauma. His plasma rifle was nearly empty. His armor was scorched and dented, and his hands shook uncontrollably. The humans had vanished completely, escaping through maintenance tunnels that led to hidden exit points scattered across the lunar surface. They had taken their wounded with them and left no bodies behind. The only trace of their presence was a message scrawled on the wall in their primitive script, written in what appeared to be human blood. "Welcome to hell." As Grixtel was loaded onto a medical transport, he stared back at Facility 7 and realized that everything they had been told about humans was wrong. These weren't weak, frightened creatures who would surrender at the first sign of resistance. These were something far more dangerous, survivors who fought with intelligence, creativity, and a determination that bordered on madness. The easy victory had become a nightmare. And this was just the beginning. The siege of New Geneva had stretched into its 47th day, and the once beautiful human city now looked like a vision from the darkest nightmares. Smoke columns twisted into the grey sky from burning buildings, while the constant thunder of artillery made conversation impossible without shouting. The sweet smell of melted metal mixed with something far worse, the stench of death that no amount of wind could carry away. Grixtel crouched behind the twisted remains of what had once been a proud Kitherian battle tank. The massive war machine now served as his only protection from human sniper fire. Its armor plating melted and warped from repeated plasma strikes. His once pristine purple skin was now covered in dust and soot, and his eyes had developed the 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too much combat through his rifle scope. He watched something that defied everything he understood about warfare. Human civilians were running through active artillery bombardment, not away from the fighting, but toward their wounded comrades. Plasma bolts screamed overhead like deadly shooting stars, and explosive shells turned entire buildings into rubble. Yet these soft-skinned creatures kept coming. "Why don't they surrender?" Zevkin asked, his voice hoarse from breathing smoke for weeks. His battle brother looked as exhausted as Grixtel felt. His armor cracked and his weapons power cell running dangerously low. "We've surrounded the entire city. Our air forces control the skies. Their military units are completely shattered." Grixtel had been asking himself the same question every day for the past month. By every measure of civilized galactic warfare, New Geneva should have fallen within the first week. The human military garrison had been overwhelmed and scattered. Their communication networks were jammed. Supply lines were cut. Food and medical supplies were running critically low. Yet somehow, impossibly, the city fought on. What made it even more incomprehensible was that most of the resistance now came from civilians. Teachers, shopkeepers, office workers, even children barely old enough to hold weapons. They had all taken up arms against the Kitherian occupation forces. It violated every principle of rational military strategy. A movement in the rubble-strewn plaza caught his attention, a human female, appearing no older than a juvenile by Kitherian standards, was crawling on her hands and knees toward a wounded figure lying in the open. She couldn't have been more than 20 cycles old, with long dark hair tied back in a practical knot and wearing the simple blue uniform of a medical worker. The area around her erupted with weapons fire. Plasma bolts seared the air so close to her body that Grixtel could see her clothes smoking. Explosive shells detonated nearby, showering her with concrete fragments and twisted metal. Any rational being would have sought cover immediately. Instead, she kept crawling forward. "What is she doing?" whispered warrior Nexidol from his position behind a distraught hover car. "Is she insane? She's going to get herself killed." The human female reached the wounded figure, a Kitherian soldier whose armor had been breached by shrapnel. Purple blood pooled beneath him, and his breathing was labored. Grixtel expected her to finish him off or search him for weapons. Instead, she began treating his wounds. "Target acquired," reported Sniper Coldeth over the communication channel. His voice was cold and professional, the tone of a warrior who had made countless kills. Human female in the plaza. No visible weapons. Requesting permission to engage. Grixtel felt his finger tighten on his rifle's trigger. It would be an easy shot. The human was completely exposed. Focused entirely on her medical work, one plasma bolt would end her life instantly. "Hold fire," he heard himself saying, the words coming out before he could stop them. She's just trying to help the wounded." Through his scope's magnification, Grixtel could see her working with primitive human medical supplies. She had torn strips from her own clothing to make bandages and was using some kind of healing gel to seal the Kitherian's wounds. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, showing no fear despite the battle raging round her. But what happened next would haunt Grixtel for the rest of his life. The human female wasn't just treating the wounded Kitherian, as more casualties accumulated in the plaza, both human and alien. She moved between them all. She gave water to a dying human soldier, then immediately turned to apply pressure bandages to a Kitherian warrior's damaged arm. She worked on whoever needed help most urgently, regardless of which side they fought for. Enemy soldiers, beings who had come to conquer her world, destroy her city, and enslave her people. And she was saving their lives. "This makes no sense," Zevka muttered, watching the scene through his own scope. "Why would she help us? We're trying to kill her." Other human civilians began emerging from the ruins, following her example. An elderly man with grey hair helped carry wounded Kitherians to safety. A young boy, barely old enough to walk properly, brought water to alien soldiers who had been trying to capture his family just hours before. The fighting in that section of the plaza gradually died down as both sides found themselves unwilling to defer. On the medical workers, it was an unspoken ceasefire, born from a kind of respect that transcended species boundaries. When Kitherian reinforcements arrived 3 hours later, they found the human female still there. She had set up an impromptu field hospital in the ruins of what had once been a children's playground. Wounded soldiers from both sides lay side by side, receiving treatment from her and a small group of human volunteers. She looked up at the towering Kitherian warriors with obvious fear in her dark eyes. Her hands trembled as she saw their weapons trained on her position. But she didn't run. She didn't abandon her patients. Instead, she stood up slowly, placing herself between the reinforcements and the wounded. "Please," she said in broken Galactic standard, the words heavily accented but clearly understandable. "Let me finish. They need help. All of them need help, squad." Leader Vexma raised his plasma rifle, his finger moving toward the trigger. "Move away from our soldiers, human. This could be a trap." But Grixtel stepped forward before his commander could fire. "Sir, request permission to secure the medical area." He kept his weapon lowered, trying to project calm rather than aggression. "These civilians are providing aid to our wounded. Military protocol requires we protect medical personnel." For a tense moment, Vexma hesitated. The other warriors waited for orders. unsure how to handle a situation their training had never covered. Finally, the squad leader lowered his weapon. Secure the perimeter, he ordered, but watched them carefully. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, Grixtel found himself helping a human female carry wounded warriors to safer positions. She worked alongside him without fear, showing him how to properly support injured limbs and apply their primitive but effective medical techniques. When a wounded Kitherian warrior grabbed her arm and whispered thank you in his native language, she smiled and replied in the same tongue, "You're welcome." She had somehow learned basic Kitherian phrases just to comfort their injured soldiers. Later that evening, as temporary medical shelters were being established, the human female approached. Grixel, she was exhausted, her medical uniform torn and blood-stained, but her eyes still held that same determination he had witnessed in the plaza. "What's your name?" she asked in careful Galactic standard. "Grixel," he replied, then added something he had never said to an enemy before. "What's yours, Minji?" she said with a tired smile. "I'm a nurse. I worked at the children's hospital before." She gestured at the ruined city around them. "Why?" The question burst out of him before he could stop it. "Why did you help us? We're your enemies." Minji was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the makeshift hospital where human and Kitherian wounded lay side by side. "Because you're hurt," she said simply. "When someone is hurt, it doesn't matter who they are or what side they're on. They just need help." That night, 17 more Kitherian soldiers requested transfers away from the human front. They couldn't explain why in their reports. How could they tell their commanders that they no longer wanted to fight beings capable of such incomprehensible compassion? Command denied all transfer requests, but something had changed in the hearts of the warriors who witnessed Minji's actions. They began to question not just the war, but everything they thought they knew about humanity. These weren't the weak, selfish creatures described in their briefings. These were beings guided by principles that seemed to transcend basic survival instincts. As Grixel settled into his sleeping role that night, he could hear Minji singing softly to comfort the wounded. Her voice carried both human and Kitherian lullabies, learned specifically to ease the pain of soldiers from both sides. For the first time since the invasion began, Grixel wondered if they were fighting the wrong war. The sterile white walls of the intelligence briefing chamber aboard the command ship Dominion Fist seemed to close and round the assembled warriors. Grixel shifted in his seat, still feeling the phantom ache of wounds that had healed weeks ago. The scars on his armor told the story of New Geneva, but the deeper wounds were invisible. Round the circular table sat 20 of the most experienced Kitherian warriors, their purple skin bearing the marks of extended combat. Many, like Grixel, had that hollow look in their eyes that came from seeing too much death. The confident young soldiers who had first landed on the human moon were gone, replaced by veterans who had learned the hard way that this war was nothing like their training had prepared them for. War analyst Vexthal stood at the center of the chamber, his thin frame draped in the dark robes of the intelligence course, and like the warriors, he had never set foot on a battlefield. But his job was to make sense of the senseless. His multiple eyes glowed with an eerie light as he activated the holographic display system. "Warriors," he began, his voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. "After 6 months of combat operations, we have finally begun to understand what we truly face." The preliminary reports were catastrophically wrong. A three-dimensional map of Earth appeared above the table, showing the current state of the invasion. Red zones marked areas under Kitherian control, while yellow indicated contested territories, but the vast majority of the planet remained stubbornly blue, human-controlled space. Humans do not fight for territory or resources like civilized species, Vexthal continued, manipulating the display to show battle patterns. They fight for concepts that have no physical form. They fight for abstractions, Grixtel leaned forward, remembering Minji's words about helping the wounded regardless of which side they fought for. At the time, it had seemed like simple kindness. Now, he was beginning to understand it might be something far more dangerous. The holographic display shifted to show intercepted human communications, video feeds from resistance cells, radio broadcasts from underground stations, and captured military communications filled the air around them. The voices were young and old, male and female, speaking in dozens of different human languages. Listen carefully, Vexthal said, enhancing the audio. Note what motivates them. A gruff human voice emerged from the speakers, speaking in the primary Earth language called English. They think they can break us by destroying our cities. They don't understand that freedom isn't a place. It's an idea, and ideas are bulletproof. Another voice, this one female and younger. My brother died defending the evacuation center. But his sacrifice means something. It means we don't kneel to tyrants, no matter how big their guns are. A third transmission, crackling with static from a damaged transmitter. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all beings are created equal, that they are endowed with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Zevkin shifted uncomfortably in his seat. They speak of ideas as if they were living things, as if concepts could win battles, because to them, they are living things. Vexthal replied grimly, human psychology is fundamentally different from any species we have previously encountered. They can literally die for abstract concepts, and somehow this makes them stronger rather than weaker. The display changed again, showing a communication from Human Sector 7, the remains of what had once been called North America. A young human voice crackled through the speakers with crystal clarity. They can take our cities. They can destroy our monuments. They can kill our leaders. But they can't take our spirit. Every human who dies fighting makes the rest of us stronger. We're not just defending Earth. We're defending the idea that no species has the right to enslave another. That's worth dying for. The chamber fell silent as the implication sank in. This wasn't just military resistance. It was something approaching religious fanaticism, but based on political and philosophical concepts rather than deities. We discovered something else, Vexthal continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Something that should terrify every warrior in this room. New images appeared in the holographic display, ancient human documents, historical records, and archaeological evidence painted a picture that made Grixtel's blood run cold. Humans have been at war with each other for their entire recorded history, not occasional conflicts over resources, but constant, brutal warfare spanning thousands of years. Their conflicts make our current campaign look like a minor border dispute. The display showed images from human military history. Massive battles involving millions of soldiers. Cities reduced to rubble by weapons that could level entire continents. Industrial facilities dedicated entirely to producing instruments of death. The scale was beyond anything in Kithirian experience. World War II, Vexthal narrated as images flashed past. 60 million humans died. The Korean conflict, 4 million casualties. Vietnam, another million. The Iraq wars, the Afghanistan campaigns, the Syrian civil war. In just the 20th century alone, humans killed over 100 million of their own species. Warrior Koldev, who had been silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke. That's impossible. No species could survive that level of self-destructs. Not only did they survive, Vexthal replied, they grew stronger. Each conflict taught them new ways to kill more efficiently. They developed weapons capable of destroying entire planets, then chose not to use them at full capacity. They learned to wage war in space, underwater, in the air, and even in the digital realm. The display showed human weapons technology advancing at an alarming rate. From crude clubs and spears to nuclear weapons in just a few thousand years. The progression was terrifying in its speed and efficiency. This is their idea of restraint, Vexthal said quietly, letting the word hang in the air like a death sentence. When they fight us, they hold back because they still see us as potentially redeemable. They haven't yet decided we need to be completely exterminated. Grixtel felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. What happens if they change their minds? The war analyst's multiple eyes focused on him with disturbing intensity. Based on their historical patterns, they become very good at making other species extinct. Not just defeated. Extinct, the holographic display showed human colonization patterns. Environmental destruction and the fate of other Earth species that had competed with humanity for resources. The list of extinct animals was staggering. Entire ecosystems wiped out not through malice, but through simple efficiency. They call it total war. Vexthal explained, when humans decide that an enemy cannot be negotiated with, cannot be reasoned with, and cannot be allowed to exist, they commit their entire civilization to the enemy's destruction. Every human becomes a soldier. Every factory becomes a weapons plant. Every resource is dedicated to the singular goal of eliminating the threat. Veteran Commander Texanol, scarred from a dozen campaigns, leaned back in his chair. Are you suggesting they're not fighting at full capacity? I'm stating it as confirmed fact. Vexthal replied coldly. Current human military deployment represents approximately 15% of their total warfare capability. They're treating this as a police action, not an existential threat. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. 15%. The humans had been holding back 95% of their military capacity. Furthermore, the analyst continued, our psychological warfare division reports that human morale is actually increasing as casualties mount. This defies all known patterns of military psychology. Most species become demoralized by losses. Humans seem to become more determined. Grixtel thought of Minji, calmly treating wounded enemies while artillery shells exploded round her. He thought of the civilians who had run into gunfire to save their neighbors. He thought of the resistance, fighters who continued broadcasting messages of defiance even as their cities burned. What do you recommend? Asked Commander Texanol. Vexthal deactivated the holographic display, plunging the chamber into stark artificial light. Immediate withdrawal from all human territories. Full evacuation of the Sol system. Permanent quarantine of human space. The suggestion sent shockwaves through the assembled warriors. Retreat. The mighty Kithirian Empire had never retreated from any conflict. The alternative, Vexthal continued, is to push them past their breaking point, and based on everything we've learned. That breaking point is when they stop seeing us as redeemable enemies and start seeing us as an existential threat to their survival. And then, Grixtel asked, though he dreaded the answer, then they stop holding back, the analyst replied. And we discover what humans are really capable of when they're no longer fighting for abstract concepts like freedom and justice. We discover what they're like when they're fighting for the simple, primal goal of making sure their species survives by ensuring ours doesn't. The briefing ended in stunned silence. As the warriors filed out, Grixtel caught sight of himself in the chamber's polished walls. He looked like a warrior who had seen too much, learned too much, understood too much, for the first time in his military career. He found himself hoping that his superiors would listen to reason. Because if they didn't, He feared that the galaxy was about to learn why humanity had survived and thrived despite spending thousands of years trying to destroy itself. The beast they were fighting wasn't just dangerous because it was strong. It was dangerous because it was still sleeping. The massive space station Concordia hung in the void between star systems like a gleaming jewel, its rotating sections generating artificial gravity for the thousands of beings who worked within. Its hulls, built centuries ago as neutral ground for galactic diplomacy, it had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the signing of peace treaties, and the declaration of wars that had shaped the galaxy. Today, it would host the most important trial in galactic history. Grixtel stood in the transport shuttle viewing port, watching the station grow larger as they approached. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to do. In a few hours, he would stand before the assembled representatives of 12 different species and reveal secrets that could save or damn his own people. The shuttle docked with a soft mechanical hiss, and Grixtel stepped into corridors filled with beings from across the galaxy. Tall, graceful ethereals floated past on streams of psychic energy. Heavily armored Drachnori warriors clanked along in their ceremonial battle suits. Delicate crystalline Vorthan delegates chimed musical notes as they communicated with each other. None of them knew what he was about to tell them about humanity. The Galactic War Crimes Tribunal chamber was a vast amphitheater designed to accommodate representatives from dozens of different species. Floating platforms adjusted automatically to provide optimal viewing angles for beings with eyes in different configurations. Translation fields ensured that every word would be understood regardless of the speaker's native language. Grixtel took his place at the witness stand, a simple platform in the center of the chamber that put him in full view of every delegate. The weight of their attention pressed down on him like a physical force. These beings represented billions of lives across the galaxy, and his words today might determine whether those lives would know peace or war. Chief Arbiter Zeldin, an ancient being whose species had achieved space flight before most others had, developed language, called the session to order with a sound like distant thunder. This tribunal recognizes Warrior Lieutenant Grixtel of the Kithirian Empire, the Arbiter announced, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. You stand before us today under the protection of truth, which guarantees your safety regardless of what testimony you provide. Do you understand the gravity of your words? I do, honored Arbiter, Grixtel replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. I stand before you today not as a hero of the Kithirian Empire, but as a soldier who has seen the true face of war against humanity. A ripple of interest passed through the assembled delegates. The human conflict had been seen as a minor territorial dispute by most galactic powers. Few understood why it merited a full tribunal hearing. I was among the first wave of Kithirian forces deployed to the human front. Grixtel began, his mind flashing back to those confident young warriors boarding their transport ships. We believed we were being sent to pacify a primitive species, barely capable of space travel. Our briefings told us that humans were weak, frightened creatures who would surrender at the first show of force. He paused, letting the irony sink in before continuing. The first engagement took place at a lunar mining facility. 50 elite Kithirian warriors against 7 humans, 5 miners and 2 security guards. We expected the battle to last minutes. It lasted 3 days. Grixtel described the horror of fighting an enemy that refused to follow conventional military doctrine. He told them about the improvised weapons, the psychological warfare, the way humans seemed to appear and disappear like ghosts in their own facilities when reinforcements arrived. They found 12 survivors out of 50 elite soldiers. The humans had vanished through maintenance tunnels, leaving behind only a message written in their own blood. Welcome to hell. The chamber had fallen completely silent. Even the ethereals had stopped their constant mental chatter to listen. But the lunar facility was just the beginning. Grixtel continued. The siege of New Geneva lasted 47 days. By every measure of civilized warfare, the city should have fallen within a week. Their military was broken, their supplies cut off, their communications jammed. He activated his personal data projector, displaying holographic images from the siege. The delegates watched human civilians running through artillery fire to save their wounded, children carrying supplies to resistance fighters, elderly humans building barricades with their bare hands. Yet somehow, impossibly, the city fought on, not with soldiers, but with civilians, teachers, shopkeepers, medical workers. They all took up arms against us. More disturbing was their treatment of our wounded. They saved the lives of enemy soldiers who had been trying to kill them just hours before. Ambassador Krelthan of the Dragnori Empire leaned forward on his platform, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber floor. The Dragnori were legendary warriors, respected throughout the galaxy for their martial prowess. Warrior Grixtel, Krelthan rumbled in his deep voice. Are you suggesting that the mighty Cathiri military cannot defeat these humans? Your empire has conquered dozens of worlds. Surely these primitives pose no real threat. Grixtel met the Dragnori's gaze without flinching. Ambassador, I am suggesting something far worse than military defeat. We can defeat them, but only by becoming monsters ourselves. And if we force them to fight for their very existence, they will respond by becoming something this galaxy has never seen. His species with nothing left to lose. He manipulated his data pad, calling up intelligence reports that had been classified until this moment. Humans have been at war with each other for their entire recorded history. In just 1 century, they killed over 100 million of their own species. They developed weapons capable of destroying entire planets, then chose not to use them at full capacity. The holographic display showed images from human conflicts throughout their history. The delegates watched in horrified fascination as evidence of humanity's capacity for both creation and destruction filled the chamber. This is their idea of restraint, Grixtel said quietly. When they fight us, they hold back because they still see us as potentially redeemable. They haven't yet decided we need to be exterminated. A Vorthan delegate chimed a musical question that the translation field rendered as, what evidence supports this claim of restraint? Grixtel had been waiting for this question. Current human military deployment represents approximately 15% of their total warfare capability. They're treating our invasion as a police action, not an existential threat. The chamber erupted in shocked sounds from a dozen different species. 15%. The humans had been holding back 85% of their military power. Furthermore, Grixtel continued over the noise. They have a concept they call go nuclear. It means they would rather destroy everything than live as slaves. Their own history shows they have done this before, to themselves. He displayed footage from human resistance broadcasts, showing civilian leaders making speeches about freedom and death before dishonor. The translations showed concepts that most galactic species found incomprehensible, the willingness to die for abstract ideas rather than concrete benefits. On it arbiters, Grixtel said, his voice rising to carry over the murmurs of disbelief. I break my oath of loyalty today, not to betray my species, but to save it. If we continue this war, we will not be fighting humans. We will be creating something worse than any demon in galactic mythology. He looked directly at the Cathirian delegation. Seeing the shock and betrayal in their faces, we will be creating humans with nothing left to protect except the principle that no species should ever have to kneel to another. The chamber fell into absolute silence as the full implications of his words became clear. And if that day comes, Grixtel concluded, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly through the acoustic systems. May the ancestors forgive us for what we will have unleashed upon the galaxy, Chief Arbiter. Zeldin called for a recess to allow the delegates to process what they had heard. When the tribunal reconvened 3 hours later, the vote for immediate ceasefire was unanimous. Even the Cytherian delegates, faced with the evidence of what they were truly fighting, voted to end the war. As Grixtel left the tribunal chamber, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. In the corridor, he was approached by a small delegation of humans who had been observing the proceedings. Among them was a young woman with dark hair tied back in a practical knot, Minji. He said, recognizing the nurse who had saved both human and Cytherian lives during the siege. She smiled, the same wall expression he remembered from that hellish battlefield. "Thank you," she said simply, "for telling the truth, for giving peace a chance." Grixtel looked at this human who had shown compassion to her enemies, who had risked her life to save beings who had come to conquer her world. Perhaps there was still hope for understanding between their species. Perhaps they could learn from each other instead of destroying one another. Perhaps the real victory would be never having to find out what humans were truly capable of when pushed beyond their breaking point. As he walked through the corridors of Concordia Station, past delegates from a dozen different worlds, Grixtel allowed himself to hope that this would mark the beginning of a new era. An era where species could coexist despite their differences, where strength was measured by the ability to show mercy rather than the capacity to inflict death. The war was over. The real work of building peace was just beginning. *The end*.